When a waiter humiliates a woman he believes doesn't belong in an exclusive restaurant, he has no idea he's making the biggest mistake of his career. She's the owner of the establishment. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any inspiring stories I share. The restaurant Trattoria di Lusso was an oasis of elegance in the bustling city. Its crystal chandeliers illuminated a dining hall adorned with frescoes inspired by Tuscany, tables draped in pristine white linens, and perfectly aligned crystal glasses. For Walter, everything about this place reflected what he admired: sophistication, luxury, and exclusivity. Walter strolled between the tables in his perfectly pressed uniform, greeting customers with a smile reserved only for those he deemed worthy. He noticed a couple seated at the central table, a man in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit and his companion, a woman in a classic black dress with understated jewelry. "Would you like to try the Brunello di Montalcino? It's one of our finest Tuscan wines," Walter suggested, leaning slightly toward them with calculated courtesy. The couple nodded, grateful for the recommendation. Walter retrieved the bottle from the cellar and returned to the table with the precision of a Swiss clock, pouring exactly the right amount into each glass. As he walked toward the next table, he noticed another couple who had just been seated. Their attire was elegant yet more practical. The man wore a white shirt with the collar slightly loose, and the woman a simple but professional dress, something that clearly suggested they had come straight from work. Walter frowned almost imperceptibly. Office clothes. 9 to 5 types. Don't they have better taste for a place like this? He thought with a mix of disdain and irony, completely oblivious to the contradiction in his own words as he moved about in his waiter's uniform. He approached them with a dry tone, barely forcing a smile. "Should I bring you the menu, or do you already know what you'd like?" he asked, without the warmth he had shown earlier. "Could you recommend something?" the woman asked politely. "Everything on our menu is excellent, ma'am. We don't specialize in anything in particular," he replied with a hint of sarcasm before turning to leave. Walter felt he had absolute control over the atmosphere. From his perspective, he was the gatekeeper, ensuring that those who, in his opinion, didn't belong at Trattoria di Lusso were kept in check. And why not? After all, he had worked hard to be there. Or at least, that's what he told himself. That night, as he adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, he had no idea his sense of control was about to unravel completely. The glass door of Trattoria di Lusso opened with a soft creak, allowing a woman to enter who caught the attention of some customers, but not Walter, who was busy adjusting the silverware on a nearby table. Gabrielle Napoli paused for a moment at the entrance, letting her gaze sweep across the restaurant. Her eyes filled with a mix of pride and satisfaction. She wore an elegant dark blue dress that complemented her poised demeanor. Her braids were styled in a sophisticated updo, and her movements exuded a natural grace that spoke of confidence without the need for ostentation. To anyone paying close attention, it was clear she belonged there. But Walter wasn't one of those people. When Walter finally approached Gabrielle, he did so with the attitude he reserved for those he believed didn't quite fit the restaurant's image. "May I help you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow slightly, his eyes scanning Gabrielle from head to toe before settling on her face. "Yes, I have a reservation," Gabrielle replied calmly, ignoring the condescending tone in Walter's voice. "It's under Gabrielle Napoli." Walter checked the reservation list on the device he carried, though not with the genuine intent of finding her name. Instead, he was stalling, deciding how to handle the situation. To him, Gabrielle had the air of someone who might be in the wrong place, someone who could afford a nice dinner on special occasions but didn't belong in a restaurant like this regularly. He murmured, pretending to look more thoroughly. "I don't see your name here. Perhaps, are you sure this is the right place?" Gabrielle looked at him directly, her expression calm but firm. "I'm absolutely certain." Walter forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you could try another nearby restaurant, something more casual. Here, we tend to have a dress code and a clientele, more accustomed to this kind of establishment." The insinuation was clear, and Gabrielle immediately picked up on the intent behind his words. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly as if evaluating something. Finally, she spoke with the same composed calm. "Don't worry. I'm happy to wait while you check again." Walter shrugged, adopting a deliberately indifferent attitude. "As you wish. But it might take a while." He left her standing at the entrance and turned his attention to another table, focusing entirely on a group of customers who clearly had his approval, 2 men wearing expensive watches and perfectly tailored suits. Walter offered them a broad smile and leaned in to take their orders with servility. Meanwhile, Gabrielle remained at the entrance. At first glance, she appeared calm, even indifferent, but her mind was working quickly. Her eyes swept over the restaurant once again, occasionally pausing on specific details, the impeccable table settings, the staff moving with precision, and of course Walter. When Walter passed by her again, he didn't even make eye contact. Gabrielle observed how his demeanor shifted with different customers, how he adopted a more rigid and professional posture with some, and a relaxed, condescending tone with others. She had studied this behavior before, witnessed it in restaurants she had visited as a guest, and unfortunately, seen it in some employees she had hired in the past. It was then that Martha, another waitress, appeared behind the counter and froze when she saw Gabrielle. Her eyes widened, and then she smiled nervously, quickly approaching. "Mrs. Napoli, it's so good to see you. Shall I take you to your table?" Walter, who was just a few meters away, stopped dead in his tracks upon hearing that. He turned slowly, his face a mix of surprise and confusion. Martha, oblivious to his reaction, continued attending to Gabrielle with a smile. "Thank you, Martha." "Yes, please," Gabrielle replied, returning the smile kindly. As she followed Martha to a table near the windows, Walter remained frozen in place. The word Mrs. echoed in his mind, combining with the last name he had ignored moments earlier, Napoli. Something about that name started to bother him, though he couldn't yet place why. He watched her as she took her seat, feeling a growing sense of discomfort. However, he still didn't realize that tonight would teach him an unforgettable lesson. Walter tried to shake off the unease creeping over him. Maybe Martha was just being overly formal with a regular customer. It can't be anything important, he thought as he continued serving other tables. Still, he couldn't help but glance occasionally at Gabrielle, who now sat comfortably by the window. From her table, Gabrielle observed Walter's behavior. She watched him move deftly between tables, alternating between obsequious smiles and thinly veiled disdain. The difference in his treatment was unmistakable, and Gabrielle took note of every detail. Walter finally decided to approach her table, though more out of appearances than a genuine intent to serve her. "Has anyone taken your order yet?" he asked in a dry tone, as if serving her was a chore. Gabrielle looked up, her expression calm. "No, not yet." Walter sighed almost imperceptibly, pulling out his notepad with an almost mechanical motion. "Fine. What will you have?" Gabrielle gave a faint smile. "What do you recommend?" Walter narrowed his eyes, evaluating her. He knew exactly how to handle these situations, or so he thought. "She'll probably want something simple or cheap to avoid spending too much," he thought with disdain. "Well, everything on the menu is excellent, of course, but maybe you'd prefer something accessible. The penne all'arrabbiata is simple and a good choice for those who aren't used to this type of cuisine," he said, emphasizing the word simple with a tone laced with condescension. Gabrielle tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "Thank you for the suggestion, but I think I'll go with something else. The ossobuco alla Milanese, please. And a glass of the Brunello di Montalcino." Walter felt a brief pang of surprise, but quickly masked it with a curt nod. "Very well. I'll bring it shortly," he replied, jotting down her order without even looking at her. As he returned to the station to send the order to the kitchen, another waiter, Peter, who had been observing the interaction, gave him a curious look. "What's going on with that customer? It looks like you're treating her like she doesn't belong here." Walter shrugged, feigning indifference. "What can I say? Some people just don't know their place." Peter frowned. "Watch what you're saying, man. That could get you in trouble." Walter let out a dry laugh. "Please, Peter. I've worked here longer than you. I know how to handle these things." Even as he spoke, he couldn't help but notice Martha returning to Gabrielle's table with a glass of water, her demeanor markedly respectful. Something about Martha's attitude was beginning to unsettle him. Despite his attempts to brush it off, Walter couldn't resist commenting on the situation to another waiter as he re-entered the dining area. "It's ridiculous, don't you think?" Walter murmured, gesturing subtly toward Gabrielle. "Some customers don't understand that this place is meant for a certain type of person." "What type?" the other waiter asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and caution. Walter smirked smugly. "People who really know how to behave. People who fit the image of the restaurant." The other waiter didn't respond, but the conversation lingered like an echo, as if waiting to come back and haunt Walter. While Gabrielle waited for her food, she continued observing discreetly. She watched as Walter served other tables, particularly a group of men in expensive suits who greeted him with laughter and pats on the back. His demeanor with them was entirely different, warm, friendly, almost as if he considered himself part of their circle. By contrast, every time he passed by her table, he didn't even glance her way. Finally, Martha approached Gabrielle with a kind smile, placing the dish in front of her with careful precision. "I hope you enjoy your meal, Mrs. Napoli. Is there anything else I can bring you?" Gabrielle shook her head, her gratitude evident. "No, thank you, Martha. You've been very attentive." Walter, watching from a distance, felt a warning bell go off inside him. The tone Martha used with Gabrielle felt unusual, formal, but with a deference reserved only for important people. A thought began to form in his mind, though he didn't want to admit it. Napoli? Why does that name sound familiar? Rather than confront his growing suspicion, he chose to ignore it and continue with his routine. However, when he saw Martha approaching the manager, Robert, with a serious expression, his unease deepened. Martha whispered something in Robert's ear, and he immediately turned to look at Gabrielle's table. His face shifted from neutrality to a mix of surprise and concern. Robert quickly walked over to Gabrielle, stopping in front of her table with a respectful bow. Walter watched the scene from afar, feeling a heavy weight settle in his chest. Who the hell is that woman? When Robert leaned in to speak with Gabrielle, his tone made it clear that she wasn't just any customer. At that moment, Walter began to realize that something was seriously wrong. Walter stood frozen, watching as Robert, the manager, leaned slightly toward Gabrielle while speaking to her in hushed tones. From a distance, Walter couldn't hear what they were saying, but something about Robert's body language alarmed him. The deference, the slight nervousness in his gestures, and the way Gabrielle nodded calmly while maintaining her impeccable posture. Robert finished speaking and turned directly toward Walter, his face now tense, a mix of contained anger and urgency. "Walter, I need you to come with me. Now," he said firmly. Walter felt his heart race. He wiped his hands on his apron, trying to appear nonchalant, though his chest felt like it was tightening. "Of course, what's going on?" he asked, feigning confusion. "Come with me," Robert repeated, offering no further explanation. When they arrived at Gabrielle's table, she was finishing a sip of her wine. As Walter approached, he felt small under her gaze. There was something unsettling about her expression, not angry or openly critical, but steady and controlled. She seemed to measure every second that passed. "Walter," Robert began, breaking the uncomfortable silence, "I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Napoli. She is the owner of this restaurant." Time seemed to freeze. Walter felt the blood drain from his face. His jaw slackened slightly as he stared at Gabrielle, searching for any sign that this might be a joke. "What?" he finally asked, incredulous. "That's right," Gabrielle replied, her tone calm but brimming with authority. "I am Gabrielle Napoli, the founder and owner of Trattoria di Lusso." Walter felt as if the ground beneath him were shifting. For a few seconds, he couldn't find any words. "Mrs. Napoli, I didn't know," he stammered, desperately trying to regain his composure. Gabrielle interrupted him with a raised hand, elegant yet decisive. "That's evident. If you had known, perhaps you would have treated me differently. But that, Walter, is precisely the problem." Her voice wasn't loud, but the weight of her words made each one resonate deeply. Robert stood to the side, his expression tense, as Walter scrambled to justify his behavior. "It wasn't my intention. I didn't think," he began, but Gabrielle cut him off again. "You didn't think." "Exactly. You didn't think that I deserved to be treated with the same respect as any of your preferred customers," she said, her tone serene yet more impactful than anger. "What you've done tonight, Walter, is not just an insult to me but to everything this restaurant stands for." Walter tried to respond, but Gabrielle wasn't finished. "When I founded this place, I did so with a clear purpose. To create an experience where everyone who walked through those doors would be treated with the same courtesy, regardless of their appearance, their clothing, or any superficial prejudice. And here you are, one of my employees, using those very same prejudices to decide who is worthy of your attention and who is not." Walter swallowed hard, feeling her words hit him like bricks. "Mrs. Napoli, I didn't mean to," he attempted, but Gabrielle's firm gaze silenced him. "Didn't mean to what? Ignore me? Humiliate me? Suggest that I didn't belong here? Because that is exactly what you did," she replied, her tone steady yet unyielding. In his desperation, Walter blurted out the worst thing he could have said. "It's just, With all due respect, ma'am, I didn't think someone of your class could be the owner of a place like this. A deathly silence fell over the table. Even Robert seemed to hold his breath, horrified by Walter's words. Gabrielle, however, didn't react immediately. She simply looked at him, tilting her head slightly as if assessing him. My class, she finally repeated, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. Let me explain something about my class, Walter. Her tone remained calm, but now there was an unmistakable intensity behind each word. I am of Italo-African descent. My mother was born in Calabria, my father in Senegal. I grew up facing attitudes like yours, both in restaurants like this and in countless other places where someone decided, based solely on my appearance, that I didn't belong. Walter tried to look away, but he couldn't. When I started in this industry, I worked as a waitress. I did what you do, but with respect and professionalism. For years, I was ignored, underestimated, and treated like an intruder, all because people like you thought they could judge me at first glance. Gabrielle paused, letting her words sink in. And do you know what I did? Instead of letting those prejudices hold me back, I decided to create a place where no one would ever have to experience what I went through. Where everyone, regardless of their class, would be treated with dignity. And tonight, Walter, you've shown me that I've failed with you. Walter felt trapped, speechless, consumed by shame. There is no excuse for what you've done, and I cannot allow someone with your attitude to continue working here, Gabrielle continued. As of this moment, you are fired. Mrs. Napoli, please, I'm asking for another chance, Walter pleaded, but Gabrielle shook her head. An apology won't undo what you've done or the damage you could cause to this restaurant. I hope this serves as a lesson, Walter. Perhaps in the future, you'll understand what it means to treat people with respect, but it won't be under my supervision. Gabrielle turned her attention to Robert. Please ensure he receives his severance pay, and make sure this never happens again with anyone else on this team. Robert nodded quickly, and Walter, head bowed and silent, turned to leave the restaurant. As he walked toward the door, he felt the stares of some customers and co-workers following him. His sense of control, his confidence, everything he had built up in his mind that evening, had crumbled. Gabrielle, for her part, took another sip of her wine, allowing silence to return to the restaurant before resuming her meal. On her face was a calm expression, but beneath it lay a determination that no one dared to question. As Walter stepped out of the restaurant for the last time, the crisp night air hit him with a chill that mirrored his situation. He glanced back at the glowing windows of Trattoria di Lusso and felt insignificant. He had lost not only his job but also the carefully crafted image of control and superiority he had clung to so tightly. Inside, Gabrielle observed the restaurant's renewed energy for a moment. Martha and Robert tended to the customers with a quiet enthusiasm, and the atmosphere regained its usual elegance. Gabrielle knew her intervention had been necessary, but she didn't pause to revel in it. Instead, she leaned toward her wine glass, gently swirling its contents, lost in thought. Everything is in order now, Mrs. Napoli, Robert said as he approached, his tone respectful. Gabrielle nodded. Thank you, Robert. But remember, it's not enough to maintain the appearance of a place like this. The essence lies in how we treat everyone, from the guests to the staff. Don't forget that. Robert bowed his head, taking her words as a personal lesson. Gabrielle took one final sip of her wine, satisfied not only with her meal but also with having reaffirmed the principle upon which her restaurant was built. Respect is not a luxury, it's a right. I hope you enjoyed this story. I'm sure you'll also love the next one. Click on the video on the screen right now, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching until the end. See you soon.